Welcome back. My name is Warren Parkin. Today we're going to discuss the Grimm's fairy tale of the three spinners. And the three spinners are all women. Christianity has a trinity of all men, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, although some Christian scholars argue that the Holy Spirit is a feminine presence, but that's a very patriarchal trinity. The Greeks, on the other hand, had a very matriarchal trinity that even the gods had to follow. And the Greeks, in Greek mythology, the three fates were named Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. Atropos means inflexible. Think about the word atrophy. If you have atrophy in your arm, that means that you can't flex it, or atrophy in your legs. And people who are paralyzed end up with atrophy. Atropos would cut the thread off at the very end. Now, Clotho, and obviously cloth comes from this word, would make the thread. So take the cotton and spin the thread. She's a spinner. Lachesis would take that thread and weave a tapestry of each individual human life. And when she was finished, Atropos would cut that thread off. And once Atropos cuts the thread, that means you're dead. Now, one of the challenges that the three fates have is that they have only one eye between them, which means that they're blind most of the time. Sometimes that eye gets dropped and lost. Sometimes they get interrupted in what they're doing, and flaws creep in when Lachesis is weaving our tapestry, and that's where we have problems as humans. And then, once again, since sometimes Atropos was blind, like most of the time, she just cut it off in the middle, and then Lachesis would have to start on a different person. That's why we have babies born in this way of thinking. One reason why we have babies born and they die in infancy. Why? Because Atropos has cut the thread off and there's nothing left for Lachesis to weave. Clotho, she's making thread all the time. Different colors, different hues, different lengths. She's making it all the time. But depending on what happens between all three of these is what our lives turn out to be. How many of you believe in fate? I'll hear people tell me that they completely believe in fate. I have an older sister who tells me, Warren, I think my entire life was planned out before I was born. And there's evidence of that in the book of Jeremiah in the Bible that says, before I made you, I set out your course. So humans have been struggling with how much is their freedom versus how much is it all just scripted. And even when we don't know it, we're playing a part. Think about that. How free are you? Do you believe in fate or do you believe in free will? This fairy tale from the Brothers Grimm is an example of the fusion of paganism with Christian beliefs. Why? Because it took a lot of time to get Christianity out to not the suburbs, but the rural areas. So here's the story, the fairy tale of the three spinners. Whenever we say fairy tale, automatically, I believe, we think, I hope there's a happy ending. Let's find out. There once was a girl who was lazy and would not spin. So here we have, as our protagonist of the story, a girl who is lazy. Why? Because she won't make thread. To make clothing out of. And let's be honest about this. To spin thread, it is a lot of work. We don't realize this today because we can go down to the local store and pick up a shirt for $5 or pants for $10. We can pay as much as we want. But clothing in my lifetime has gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I've been buying my own clothing since the age of 12. And I'm proud of that. And I was proud at the time that I could buy my own clothes. But it wasn't that clothing was as inexpensive as it is today. So there once was a girl who was lazy and she would not spin. And her mother could not persuade her to do it, even as hard as she tried. At last the mother became angry and out of patience. And she gave the girl a good beating, so that the girl cried out loudly. At that moment, the queen was going by. So enter, we have the queen. We have a little girl getting beaten, and we have a queen. She was going by, and she heard the crying, and so she stopped and going into the house, because the queen can go wherever she wants, right? She asked the mother, "Why are you beating your daughter?" So that everyone on the street outside can hear her cries. The woman, the mother, was ashamed to tell of her daughter's laziness, so she said, "It's because I just can't stop her from spinning. She's forever at it, and I am poor, and I cannot furnish her with flax enough." So we have the lying mom right here. "I beat her because she's so good." Then the queen answered, "I like nothing better than the sound of the spinning wheel." And if you've never seen a spinning wheel, look it up on the net and see. It's kind of a fascinating contraption. "And I always feel happy when I hear its humming. Let me take your daughter with me to my castle. I have plenty of flax. She shall spin there to her heart's content." The mother was only too glad of the offer, and the queen took the girl with her. When they reached the castle, the queen showed her 3 huge rooms filled with the finest flax, as full as they could hold. "Now you can spin me this flax," said she, "and when you can show it me all done, you shall have my eldest son for bridegroom. You may be poor, but I make nothing of that. Your industry is dowry enough." So the queen is talking about marriage. She's never met the girl before who's being beaten up, but since the mother says she's so industrious, meaning she works hard, that's who she wants to marry the prince. And that's big enough dowry. Now, you probably heard the word dowry. Let me see if I have a different marker that works a little better. You probably heard the term dowry, which is a fancy word for the bride price, meaning that traditionally in Western culture, when a woman gets married, her family has to pay because she's going to not be producing. She's going to be property. And because of that, you have to pay money to have her taken off of your hands. This tradition still exists today in the United States in the sense that who is expected to pay for the reception for the bride and groom? The girl's family, the bride's family. And so she's saying, look, if you're that industrious, I don't care if you're poor, but that is a dowry enough, that is dollars enough for your dowry. The girl was inwardly terrified, for she could not have spun the flax even if she were to live to be 100 years old, and were to spin and sit every day and spin all of her life from morning to evening. And when she found herself alone, she began to weep. And she sat up like that for 3 whole days without putting her hand on it, because she hates doing it. And she's not good at it, right? On the third day, the queen came, and when she saw that nothing had been done of the spinning, she was surprised. But the girl excused herself by saying that she had not been able to begin because of the distress she was in at leaving her home and her mother. I'm so homesick for my mom who beats me. And the queen believes her. The queen's very gullible, right? The excuse contented the queen, who said, however, as she went away, tomorrow you must begin to work. When the girl found herself alone again, she could not tell how to help herself or what to do. And in her perplexity, she went and gazed out the window. And there she saw 3 women passing by. The first of them had a broad, flat foot. So we have somebody with a broad, flat foot. These are all disfigurations, right? The second had a big underlip that hung down over her chin. And the third had a remarkably broad thumb. They all of them stopped in front of the window and called out to know what it was that the girl wanted. She told them all her need, and they promised her to help. They promised her their help and said, once we've helped you, then you will invite us to your wedding and not be ashamed of us, and you will call us your cousins, and you'll let us sit at the table. So they want the place of honor at the wedding, even though each of these 3 spinners are disfigured. One has the lip that hangs down past her chin. The other has a broad, flat foot. And the third has a thumb that has been mashed. I use mash in the southern way, okay? Because normally I would say smashed or broadened. If you will promise this, we will finish off your flax spinning in a very short time. With all my heart, answered the girl. Only come in now and begin at once. Please do this for me. Then these same women came in, and she cleared a space in the first room for them to sit and carry on their spinning. The first one drew out the thread and moved the treadle that turned the wheel. That's the one with the big foot, right? The second moistened the thread. The third twisted it. That's the one with the big thumb. And rapped with her finger on the table. And as often as she rapped, a heap of yarn fell to the ground, and it was most beautifully spun. But the girl hid the 3 spinsters out of the queen's sight, and only showed her, as often as she came, the heaps of well-spun yarn. And there was no end to the praises she received. So she's deceiving, right? Just like her mother. When the first room was empty, they went to the second, and then to the third, so that at last all was finished. Then the 3 women took their leave, saying to the girl, do not forget what you promised, and it will be the better for you. So, in this story, promises, honesty, integrity, will bring rewards, right? Do not forget what you promised, and it will be better for you. And when you're talking to what I think is symbolically the 3 fates, you don't want to make fate angry. People talk about karma today, and they call karma's a bitch. It's a very common thing. That's a misunderstanding in Western culture of Eastern philosophy, where karma is not just a bitch. Karma is actually who gives people the good things as well. What comes around goes around. As Jesus said, what you sow, what you reap, what you sow. So it's not that karma's always a bad thing. But don't mess with the 3 fates, because if you do, who knows when your bread will run out. So when the girl took the queen and showed her the empty rooms and the great heaps of yarn. The wedding was at once arranged, and the bridegroom rejoiced that he should have so clever and diligent a wife, and he praised her exceedingly. And the girl said, I have 3 cousins, and they've shown me a great deal of kindness, and I would not wish to forget them in my good fortune. May I be allowed, which is a very common southern phrase, right? Allowed, instead of have free will. May I be allowed to invite them to the wedding and to ask them to sit at the table with us? The queen and the bridegroom said at once, there's no reason against it. So when the feast began, in came the 3 spinsters in strange guise. And the bride said, dear cousins, you are welcome. Give me a minute, puppy, okay? Just another minute. My puppy is chiming in because it's raining. Oh, said the bridegroom. Isn't this a great way to start out a marriage? How come you have such dreadfully ugly relations? Meaning, why are your relatives so damn ugly? And then he went up to the first spinster and said, how is it that you have such a broad, flat foot? Because, you know, feet were considered an erotic thing back then. With treading, answered she, with treading. Then he went up to the second and said, how is it you have such a great hanging lip? With licking, answered she, with licking. Then he asked the third, how is it you have such a broad thumb? With twisting thread, answered she, with twisting thread. Then the bridegroom said that from that time forward his beautiful bride should never again touch a spinning wheel. And so she escaped the tiresome flax spinning. Alright, so I want you to think about what could the morals of this story be. And that is the end. There's nothing more. Not happily ever after, even though if you're the girl who's lazy and your husband realizes that what happens when you're industrious means that your body gets misshapen and it takes a toll. And any of you who've had relatives, parents, brothers and sisters who do hard physical labor, which spinning is, know that it takes a toll on the body. So she gets her happily ever after because she never has to spin and she never spun before, right? She had the 3 spinners do it, the 3 fates. And as they said, if you actually respect us, it will go better for you. If she had disavowed them at that wedding and said, oh no, they're not my relatives, what would her husband be expecting her to do? He would expect her to keep being industrious. Why? Because she's deceived all of them. Another observation from this story is that sometimes deception pays off. Now, I'm not a big believer in lying and deceiving people, but the story seems to support the idea that if you lie well enough, plus have the intervention of the 3 fates, then you may get away with it. I think most likely you will not. The other thing that this story is talking to us about is physical disabilities. People who have been damaged in some way. Recently, our president said that he didn't want any amputees at his parade that he held a year or so ago. Veterans who have had to have amputees, and in his words, I quote, nobody wants to see that. On the other hand, if you think of people as people, they're people still, even if they lost an arm, a leg, even if they're like my niece who was born with a hair lip, bilateral, and her nose was touching her gum line, and her lips were all the way turned up as a baby. You don't look at a child like that and say, oh, nope, she's not my relation. And now she's a grown woman after more than 130 surgeries and doing just fine. They reconstructed her whole face. Or my twin sister who was born with a hole in the roof of her mouth. Or my daughter Ashley. Come here for a second. Uh-oh, we'll have to lower it a little bit. Or my daughter Ashley, who, if you can see, say hi to my class.
Hi.
She has Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she is a good, kind person. And it used to be that people would hide people like Ashley away or give them to institutions where they would live on average back in the 70s to the age of 25. Ashley will have a good full life because she just turned 32 years old. Thank you, Ashley. Say goodbye.
Bye.
So this story talks to us about the idea of not hiding what's considered societally as ugly, of not being ashamed of the people who help us out, of not being ashamed of our relatives. Think about this. We don't have to love everything that our parents did. Like I grew up hating my own father and loving him at the same time. But he had 10 children, I think. If I had 10 children, I would have been more crazy than he was. And he worked hard his whole life to take care of me and my twin sister, who were the youngest, and everybody else who came before us, and my mother. And I'm appreciative of that. It doesn't make him a saint. It didn't mean that he didn't have warts and like to whip off his belt and beat people. But I'm not ashamed of my parents. I'm not ashamed of my daughter Ashley. I'm not ashamed of my wife who got cancer. And I'd push her around in a wheelchair as she was losing weight, and people would come up to me and say, "Oh, Sherry looks so good. She's lost so much weight." And I'd look at them and say, "That's because she's dying." All right? There's illness and deformities, and disabilities are nothing to be ashamed of. And I think that that's one of the most beautiful things about the story of the three spinners. Quiet, quiet, quiet. And the idea that if you do what is right, if you recognize those who help you and take them in as part of your family, that in the end, things are going to turn out for the best. Sorry about the puppy whining. It's not really raining hard. She just wants to be up here. She wants me to show her on the screen too. You have a good day.
In that area.